Hi there, and welcome to this day in history for November 9. November 9 is the 313th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 52 days remaining until the end of the year. And today we're going to start in the year 1886, when the American actor Ed Wynn was born. He died in 1966. Ed Wynn. In 1938, the Nazis launched Kristallnacht. This was a campaign of terror against Jewish people and their homes and businesses in Germany and Austria. The events of this night left many dead, thousands of businesses, homes, synagogues damaged, vandalized. The violence continued through November the 10th and was later dubbed Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, after countless smashed windows. Not a pleasant thing to think about, but important to remember so that it doesn't happen again. In 1956, Jean-Paul Sartre denounced communism. He had long been an admirer of the Soviet Union, but he denounced both the USSR and its communist system following the brutal Soviet invasion of Hungary. In 1965, a big blackout in the Northeast. At dusk, the biggest power failure in U.S. history occurred as all of New York State, portions of 7 neighboring states, and parts of eastern Canada were plunged into darkness. The Great Northeast Blackout began at the height of rush hour, delaying millions of commuters, trapping 800,000 people in New York subways, and stranding thousands more in office buildings, elevators, and trains. 10,000 National Guardsmen and 5,000 off-duty policemen were called into service to prevent looting. In 1967, the first issue of Rolling Stone magazine was published. In 1970, the Supreme Court refused to rule on the legality of the Vietnam War. By a 6-3 vote, the justices rejected the effort of the state of Massachusetts to bring a suit in federal court in defense of Massachusetts residents claiming protection under a state law that allowed them to refuse military service in an undeclared war. In 1990, Willie Nelson's assets were seized by the IRS. Eventually, they came to an agreement to revenue share from Mr. Nelson's music business. He was struggling to pay a $16.7 million tax debt that had led federal government to seize all his assets. He'd made some investments in the 80s that later on the IRS ruled illegal. With interest and penalties on top of his unpaid fines, he eventually faced a tax bill in excess of $16 million. Through his lawyers, he convinced the IRS to take a settlement of $6 million cash to settle the entire debt, but he didn't even have $6 million. His daughter said later that he didn't have $1 million and he probably didn't even have $30,000. In anticipation of negotiations with the IRS breaking down, Nelson had his daughter remove his beloved guitar trigger from his Texas home and ship it to him in Hawaii, where he was golfing when the feds raided his home on November 9, 1990. He said, "As long as I got my guitar, I'll be fine." Ultimately, Willie Nelson did get to keep his guitar, and he even got his Texas ranch back, and I'll tell you how that happened. This is so awesome. The government was auctioning it off to the highest bidder in January of 1991. I'm probably going to choke up a little bit here. The highest bidder was a Nelson fan who purchased the ranch at the behest of a group of farmers who threw their support behind Nelson in thanks for his work in organizing the Farm Aid charitable concerts. In 1991, Nelson released a compilation album entitled The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories? The first and perhaps last major label record album ever released under a strict revenue sharing agreement with the Internal Revenue Service. While the revenues generated by the IRS tapes did not come close to settling the debt on its own, Nelson did manage to retire his debt to the federal government by 1993. And I wasn't in nearly as big a trouble as Willie Nelson was, but I did get behind on my taxes once. Oh my goodness, the penalties and interest. I mean, they were very kind to me. We talked about what my debt was and what my income was and what I had to spend money on and what I had left, and agreed upon a $100 a month payment. And that $100 a month payment, $50 was added back in for penalties and interest. know, it's best to just try to make sure you don't get in that spot in the first place, if it's at all possible. Anyway, yeah, that was real touching how people came to his aid and helped him get out of that spot. And I'd like to stop right there, but there's one more thing that I want to tell you about. In 2004, best-selling Millennium Trilogy author Stieg Larsson died, 50 years old. Swedish author Stieg Larsson had a heart attack only months after turning in the manuscripts for 3 crime thrillers: The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire, and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, which would later, they all became international bestsellers. Known collectively as the Millennium Trilogy, the novels featured the characters of Mikhail Blomkvist, a middle-aged journalist, and Lisbeth Salander, a young pierced and tattooed computer hacker with a troubled past. Larson never lived to see his book's successes and died without a will, setting off a protracted legal battle for the rights to his work. Some pretty remarkable fiction there. I've read all 3 of those. There's some adult subject matter, so not for children, but quite riveting. And I guess that's where we're going to leave it today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And feel free to share. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. All right, let's try this again. Blah, 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 coffee mug. Hello, kitty. Hello, parody. In 1972, H.
Your call cannot be taken at the moment, so please leave your message.
Thank you. Thank you so much. They don't want to leave a message. Somewhere I have an outgoing message that says, if you're not going to leave a message, stop calling. But I don't think I have that one on my answering machine. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. Sure would be nice if I could ever read one of these in its entirety without having to start anything over. That would be awesome. I might have to take another look at that. I'm going to have to look at that. Better take a look at that. This is why I don't do live shows.